I'm a female. I work a pretty standard job in an office 5 days a week. One thing I really like to do though is cook. I cook dinner for myself almost every night. In order to do so, I go to the store for fresh ingredients probably every other day. Right on the way home from work, there's a Walmart only about a mile from my apartment. I found that they usually have the cheapest prices, so I go there for produce and protein all the time. Sometimes I go to other stores, but by far the most common one for me is Walmart. The story takes place just a few months back. Like usual, I was stopping at Walmart after work. I would never get much, just like 4 or 5 ingredients usually, and sometimes whatever else I needed as well. I got off of work anywhere from 3 p.m. to 4, so I get to Walmart shortly after that each day. This store was usually sort of busy. One day an employee by the produce area said hi to me. I mentioned this because the next time I was shopping, he said hi to me again when I was in the same area. Looking back, I hadn't really noticed him before, but I had never really paid attention to the employees. He was bald, had a small dark beard, and was sort of a big guy. He seemed very friendly, and the second time he asked me how my day was going. We made very basic conversation for maybe 30 seconds before I told the man I better go, and I went on with my shopping. This ended up becoming a regular thing over the next couple of weeks or so. Every time I was shopping, this same Walmart employee would say hi and engage in conversation with me. I didn't mind it too much because he was always really nice. Although when I was getting ingredients after work, I was sort of anxious to get home and didn't really want to chit-chat. The man did start to ask slightly more personal questions each time, like if I was coming home from work, where I worked, and where I lived. Things like that were starting to weird me out a little bit. I wasn't sure if the man was just a really friendly employee or something else. I told myself he was just a nice guy, and like I said, it didn't really bother me. That was until one time I was walking through Walmart doing my usual shopping, and he approached me again. He asked me how my day was in the usual, then he asked me for my number. I was nice, but I told the man no. I was afraid he would get the wrong idea if I said yes. Besides, he should know how weird it sounded. I mean, come to think of it, I never really saw the guy doing any real work. He would always just be standing around and then talk to me. The man seemed offended when I said no. I started to try and explain my reasoning to the man, but he just turned and walked away as I started to speak. His whole body language changed after he walked away. I resumed my shopping. He had gone further into the grocery aisles of the store, but luckily I didn't have to get anything back there. I was inside the Walmart shopping for maybe 10 more minutes before checking out and leaving. I remember that on that day I parked in the back of the parking lot. When I got inside my car, I noticed that the Walmart employee was inside a car not too far away from mine. I really have no idea how I noticed him looking back, but I'm glad that I did. I was assuming that he was either on a break or had just gotten off of work for the day. He did not appear to be looking at me, which I was glad to see. I pulled out of my parking space, only to see him pull out and exit the parking lot behind me. I watched in my rearview mirror, and he made the same 2 turns that I did to get back to my apartment. Walmart was never my first choice as a place to work given the low-quality rep it has, but I applied for the job 2 years ago and took it for one reason: it was overnight. I wouldn't have to worry about crazy customers or anything. I just had to stock the shelves during the store's closed hours. This happened just a week or 2 after I started working there. I got some training from the manager for the first couple of days, then I started working alone like everyone else. The store was huge, so we had a lot of ground to cover every night, but the work itself was simple. We'd each have a long cart full of boxes to stock for each aisle, and we'd get as much done as we could before our shift was over. On Monday nights, I got to the store and clocked in at 11 p.m. I talked to the manager, then got my assigned aisles for the night and got to work. I was a pretty shy person, not great at making friends unless they talked to me first, so I always kept conversations to a minimum and focused on work, especially since I was new. As I was searching for the correct spot for one of the boxes in the aisle, a man came up behind me and tapped me on the shoulder. It startled me, but he politely asked where the bathroom was. I told him, and he walked away. I thought he was just another new employee since they'd been hiring a lot recently. I mean, the store was closed anyway, so what else was I supposed to think? I carried on finishing in the aisle and moving to the next until the man came back. He stood at the end of the aisle I was in and did an awkward wave. He looked to be nervous or uneasy about something. I asked if he needed something. "Yeah, can you help me?" he stuttered. "Oh, sure," I said, following him. I had no idea what he needed, but thinking he was a new employee, I thought he must have made some sort of mistake and didn't want to tell the manager in fear of getting in trouble. We passed an aisle with another worker in it, and he gave me a funny look. Just as I was starting to question things, the man stopped. We were at the front of the store by the front service desk. "It's right here if you could just reach it for me," he said, stepping aside and pointing at the other side of the counter. I walked in front of him and leaned over the counter, looking for what he was pointing at, but then I felt a sudden dull object being pressed into my back. The man grabbed me aggressively and held me down, telling me to be quiet. I realized the object was likely the barrel of a gun, and my whole body went numb with fear. "Open it," he said in a hushed voice, referring to the cash register at the front desk. I told him I was just an overnight stalker and didn't have access to that stuff, but he didn't believe me. He got more aggressive each time he asked me before another employee walked by. The man yelled at him to open the register, but the employee looked just as scared as me. I told him I could call the manager to come up and open it for him, begging him not to do anything else. He agreed, and I picked up the store phone to call, but the other employee made a sudden run for it, which must have caught the man off guard. He shoved me against the counter, knocking the wind out of me, then ran across the store. I stayed there and managed to call 911. Luckily, everyone was okay, and the man actually didn't chase the other employee, but just left the store instead. Everything was caught on store cameras too, showing him hide just before closing, and even got a pretty good face shot. He was later identified and arrested, where they found that he was actually using a fake gun that he'd spray painted all black. I still work at Walmart today, and I've gotten a lot closer with some of my coworkers, but I still find myself staying alert sometimes, nervous that someone else could be lurking around in the huge store without me knowing. I worked at Walmart 6 years ago when I was in college. My college schedule was terrible, having classes scattered throughout the day, so finding a job with hours I could consistently work was hard. The Walmart by my campus was open 24 hours and was hiring for the overnight cashier position. Overnight was the only time I knew I could always work and not have to worry about missing class. I took the interview and the job, and for a while it was going well. It was surprisingly busy throughout the night, but it made time go by faster. I was almost always the only cashier working, so I didn't have any coworkers to talk to unless one of the warehouse guys walked by. After a few months of working, I started to notice the same routine customers coming in. There was this one man in particular that always came around 2 a.m. and would buy random items every time. He would buy clothes of various sizes and genders, random food, toys, tools, everything. He always came alone though, wasn't much of a talker, and was very reserved, just checking out and leaving without saying anything. With nothing better to do, I'd always think about what the guy was up to. I never really thought he was actually up to anything, but my mind would wander sometimes. But then one night at 2 a.m., like usual, the man came into my checkout lane, and to my surprise, he started talking to me. He asked how my night was going and if I had any plans for the weekend. I kept up with the small talk but was still shocked that he was even talking. If I didn't know any better, I'd say he was definitely on something. He looked extremely tired, and his hair was greasy and unkempt, but his eyes were wide open. He paid for his stuff, then thanked me and left. I let my mind wander again, thinking about what the sudden change was. The rest of the night was really slow, dragging on until 6 a.m. when I finally clocked out. The parking lot was mostly empty, and the sun was just starting to rise. As I walked to my car, I saw someone was parked next to me with their car on. I got closer, and when I was just a few feet away, a man got out. It was the strange guy that had come in at 2 a.m., which was 4 hours ago. He smiled, looking even more tired than he did earlier. I said hi and walked around to the other side of my car trying to act normal, but he followed me around to my driver's side door. I told him I had to go home, but that I would see him tomorrow. He didn't say anything but just continued smiling and staring. I opened my door and started to get in, but the guy suddenly grabbed my arm, holding me tight. I looked back at him and his smile was gone. He forced me out of my car and started pulling me toward his car. I was yelling and fighting back, not letting him pull me more than a few feet before I pushed him down. I hurried inside my car and drove away, checking my mirrors to make sure he didn't follow. I didn't see him, but just in case, I didn't go home and instead parked at a McDonald's and called the police. After they interviewed me and got the case written down, they started investigating. They had some footage on the CCTV in the store and the parking lot. I was hopeful, but after a few weeks, they still didn't have an identity. I continued working and never saw the man again. It makes me sick thinking about all of the stuff he was buying, like clothes of different sizes that I know are probably for other victims he had taken. I'm lucky to have gotten away, but I still feel terrible. Part of me was really hoping he'd come back though, so that I could attempt to stop him from getting away again. Eventually, COVID happened and the Walmart stopped doing 24 hours, so I lost my job anyway. It's been 6 years, but I hope he got caught somehow or does soon.